Thank you, Sarah. Now another sort of major and macro factor that involves all aspects of shipping and shipping finance is the energy transition. I'd like now to ask James Frew, who's Business Consultancy Director of Lloyds Register, to make his presentation on to 2020 to 2030 and beyond, pathways to de-risk the energy transition. James, please.
Thank you, Kevin. Good morning, everyone. I'd start by thanking Marine Money, Kevin and Mia for all the hard work that's gone into what looks like a great conference lineup and really well attended. So great to be here again. When I think about sort of shipping today, I think about risk, to be honest. I think that you have an industry that's capital intensive, long-lived assets going through disruption. And I think you have both risks and opportunities stemming from that. And what I want to do is present some of the thinking that we've been doing around both those risks and those opportunities that we see coming out of the energy transition and its undoubted impact that it will have in shipping. And really, I want to sort of break it down into four main categories or four main areas of risk. Firstly, energy cargoes. The cargo base itself of shipping is going to evolve through the transition, and the ships that the sort of the next generation of energy carriers, be they tankers or be they gas carriers, will have to evolve as well. The second point is that shipping, we've already seen a lot of pressure from owners calculating their CIIs, realizing they have non-compliant ships, trying to look for solutions. You've not seen anything yet. The 2030s and the steps down that we'll see in terms of CII reference values will be very significant. And we believe that really a lot of the ships that are sort of 5, 7, 9 years old today will have really significant challenges in terms of compliance, and you'll need to set a strategy as of today to support those ships in meeting those challenges. I've talked about challenges. I do think there are big opportunities too. I think I just want to touch on one of those. The way in which Fuel EU is designed, I think, does give quite a lot of opportunity for forward-thinking companies as well. And then I want to sort of close by just talk about how procurement for the industry will change. The way in which the industry it buys fuel is fantastic. It's very, very easy. It will not be the case, I think, unfortunately, in the 2030s. So to kick off with, when we think about future cargoes, obviously, future has huge amounts of uncertainty within it. And I think the way in which LR is trying to capture this uncertainty is through our Global Maritime Trends Report, and specifically the creation of 4 different scenarios. In the first scenario that we're painting, and I think it's, given it's just the morning of the conference, I'll pick the optimistic scenarios. So in the first scenario, the early transition, that sort of sees regulation driving a strong global shift towards a hydrogen economy. The second scenario, a tech-driven scenario, sees the development of technologies, particularly around carbon capture, that allow the world to stay within safe climate limits whilst continuing to burn fossil fuels. The fragmented transition, unfortunately, is probably the one we're closest to at the moment, where you see very uneven regulation, very limited global coordination and collaboration to drive the energy transition. The fourth one is sadly probably fairly self-evident. It's the delayed transition. And I mean, just to give an idea of what we think that means for shipping, it has sea levels rising by 40 centimeters. And if you think about global port infrastructure, for even ports like Shanghai or Houston, that's going to be a huge challenge. So I think we have these 4 scenarios, and then trying to translate these into what that means for seaborne carriage of gas or seaborne carriage of energy. And I think the interesting message, I'd say, is that here I've plotted 2020, 2030, and 2050. The overall volumes of gas being moved around in 2050 aren't significantly different under the two scenarios I'm looking at, the early transition or the tech-driven transition, but their composition really is. You see significant volumes of ammonia moving around under the early transition. That's driven by the shift to the hydrogen economy, the need for countries with limited renewable resources to import, basically they're importing sunlight and wind in the form of ammonia converted in Australia, converted in Chile, converted to hydrogen into ammonia, and then importing those into principally Northeast Asia. That's the early transition. In the tech-driven transition, the rise of carbon capture gives a lot more scope to continue to burn fossil fuels. So we see LNG playing a far bigger role under the tech-driven transition than it is under our early transition. Implications for shipping. We believe that in the the current wave of LNG carriers, we believe maybe some of the last ordered that don't have dual containment systems for both LNG and ammonia. So we see that evolution of ship design is going to have to take into account the energy transition as well, particularly for an LNG carrier, extremely capital intensive, particularly today with shipyard prices coming close to 270 million. You'll need some redundancy, you'll need some optionality there. I've touched briefly on the challenge for existing vessels. I mean, we see the challenge being pretty significant. I think one of the challenges that shipping faces is also this fragmented regulatory landscape, where you have a very base level of compliance driven by the IMO, EEXI, CII. You have voluntary initiatives such as Sea Cargo Charter, Poseidon Principles. You also have company-specific initiatives such as sort of Anglo-American or Shell that are potentially driving faster decarbonisation even than under the Sea Cargo Charter. You have the EU ETS and Fuel EU for the first time putting a price on carbon and driving and potentially driving ship owners or ship charterers into greater action. And then, of course, green corridors. We've seen a lot of talk around green corridors. Probably the most advanced is the Silk Alliance, which LR is supporting. But, of course, when you have a green corridor, when all ships on a given route are burning a green fuel, that's going to have quite a significant impact for the vessels. I think we'll see, to be honest, a lot of charts that look like this over the coming 10 years. This is sort of plotting a transition pathway for a single vessel. So this is based on a real project that LR did, looking at this vessel, I think is a VLCC. The vessel's 10 years old. We're looking at how we can get that vessel trading or keep that vessel trading through to the end of its life in 2034. To begin with, when we did this project in 2022, the first couple of years of the vessel's life, 22, 23, the first couple of years of the project, we're keeping that vessel in compliance with the trajectory just by a bit of speed optimization. So you can see the grey dotted line is the decarbonisation trajectory this vessel or a VLCC will have to follow to be IMO compliant and reach net zero by 2050. To begin with, you start off with a bit of speed optimization. We saw dry docking was coming in 2024, looked at certain energy efficiency technologies to retrofit that vessel to improve its compliance. And the combination of operational optimization, voyage routing, and energy-saving devices brings that vessel through to 2027. But for the last sort of 6-7 years of the vessel's life, it's also going to have to burn a biofuel to stay compliant. I think that's this sort of analysis, understanding the trade-offs, understanding the costs, and also identifying the windows of opportunity to conduct things like retrofits and optimizing which retrofits you choose, I think are going to be, this is going to be a significant part of the industry. The other point I'd say around retrofits is it's key to have real data on how these energy-saving devices perform. We've seen a lot of manufacturer estimates around fuel savings. I think it's fair to say that some of those are a little bit on the optimistic side. I think getting real access to real-time data from voyage performance management systems or from the long-term sea trials that companies like Lloyds Register do, to me, is really, really key to successfully de-risking the transition. And it's also, I think people have this assumption that a new building is somehow going to be immune to this. It's not at all. I think actually new buildings are in a really interesting situation here. So this just shows a piece of work we did on an MR tanker being delivered in 2027. And you can see that building an MR tanker, optimizing the hull form, building the best ship you can today, but without putting something like wind propulsion on it, that vessel will be non-compliant with CII by the mid-2030s. I think, in our view, it gets its first D in 2034. By 2037, it's had 3 D ratings on CII, and hence will be non-compliant. What I've shown here is the percentage of biofuel you'd need to drop into that tanker to keep it compliant. But obviously, this sort of analysis means that thinking very carefully about wind-assisted propulsion or air lubrication is going to be quite important in terms of giving you additional years of CII compliance before you start having to drop in expensive biofuels. I don't want to just paint a fairly grim picture. I think there are lots of opportunities here. Given time, I'm just going to focus on one of them, and that's the Fuel EU. And I think if you set your goal as decarbonising the shipping industry, I actually think Fuel EU is quite a well-designed regulation to try and do that. I think things like the benefits from wind assistance that go into Fuel EU, I think, are quite clever. I think, though, what's really interesting is the pooling and the benefits of pooling ships. So this is a project we did for a major dry bulk charterer, chartering hundreds of ships a year, and looking at the viability this charter has got enough control, a big enough fleet, that they can at least guarantee that one vessel will always be lifting cargoes from Latin America into Europe, and looking at whether it would make sense for that vessel to then burn methanol. So taking into account additional capex of building this, I think was a Kamsarmax, so additional capex of methanol fuel Kamsarmax, additional higher fuel costs of burning the methanol, and comparing that to the penalties that you would offset across the wider fleet of vessels. And what you can see is, yes, burning e-methanol or biomethanol, you have significantly higher fuel costs, but you save significant amounts on the Fuel EU penalties. For us, building a ship today, if you're going to run it on biomethanol, the business case is already there, providing you can guarantee that vessel's going to be in and out the EU. And even the far more expensive e-methanol, and don't underestimate how brutally expensive e-fuels are, but even burning the more expensive e-methanol, there's a business case to save 30 million in the sort of second period we've looked at, 2030s to 2040s. You'll save 30 million across a fleet of ships. You have one ship burning e-methanol. So I think that's quite a striking example of where there is an opportunity from the energy transition. And finally, just to sort of wrap up, I've touched briefly on fuels, and I do think that the way in which we procure fuels is going to have to change significantly. I think just having a vessel appearing in Fujairah, bunkering a completely standard fuel with a well-established ISO standard and not needing to worry, unfortunately, I don't think those days are going to continue for very much longer. I think all of us in shipping are going to have to take a few courses in chemical engineering around fuel composition. This is some of the work that LR's been doing. We've analysed every single fuel pathway for alternative fuels. We've broken it down into the constituent parts, be that electrolysis or carbon capture, or we've looked at different feedstocks like municipal solid waste or manure for for biofuels, try to price each step of that chain, both in terms of the cost and the carbon content, and then looked at what we think are realistic scenarios for how fuel prices will evolve. So, you know, hydrogen today, on a very, very good day, is something like $7 a kilo. How low can that go? Can you get down to $3 a kilo? Can you get down to $2 a kilo? What technologies would let you do that? Is that proton exchange membrane electrolyzers? Is that solid oxide electrolyzers? Is it just a really, really big alkaline electrolyzer? What can unlock that? What are the gateways to allow e-fuels to become more viable? And what do we think is a sensible lower price? To us, this is quite an important piece of analysis. It also, of course, feeds into the life cycle assessment of the greenhouse gas equivalents of fuels. And based on that, we're building optimizing models for, again, principally large charterers, sending vessels into Europe. What's the optimal amount of biofuel or an e-fuel to be dropping into your ship? So we're already doing that. We're already seeing the large charterers and the large fuel suppliers quite interested in that sort of analysis. And the final thing, I think, in shipping, we don't really, because we haven't had the data, we don't really think about the full life cycle emissions of a vessel, really from a cradle to grave basis. So this has been a huge effort for my team, trying to pull out data from the shipyards. We've done this particularly in collaboration with one of the large Korean shipyards to understand really how much carbon, how much environmental impact in general goes into building a ship, how much comes from operating the ship, and how much comes from scrapping the ship. And I think by trying to get to that, understand the data, what you measure, you can manage. So trying to understand where the CO2 or where the greenhouse gas impact is coming from throughout the ship's life tells you where you can focus on. And certainly what we've seen from this study is that within shipbuilding, as well as ship operations, within shipbuilding itself, there's a lot of room for optimizing and reducing environmental impact. On that note, I hope I've not left everyone dispirited. I think the energy transition has huge, huge opportunities as well as huge challenges, but it will require some new thinking. Thank you very much.